Welcome to Pipes Around the House. In this video I'm going to show you how to move a radiator from one wall to another. As part of the process I'll show you how to remove and fix the radiator to the new wall, drain down the central heating system, cut the old copper pipe and fit the new Speedfit pipe, repressurize the system and get it back up and running, and I'll even throw in a few tips along the way. The first thing I need to do is remove the carpet. I do this by using the pliers and gently pinching the edge of the carpet. Once I've got this up, I can then use my hands to peel it back, being careful to avoid the spikes on the carpet gripper around the edge of the floor. By removing the carpet, it gives me access to the floorboards. I can then remove the floorboards and work out exactly what's going on with this plumbing before I start to take the radiator off the wall. You'll see here my floorboards are held down with a combination of screws and nails. The screws should be easily undone using an impact driver, but where nails are used, I'll need a few tools to prise the floorboards up. This floorboard here has the pipes running through it has the skirting board sat on top of it and is held down with nails, so it's going to be difficult to remove, whereas these floorboards here are held down with screws and should be easily lifted, so I'll target these first. And just to note, in my situation the pipe goes straight down into the floorboards. If you have a dot and dab or stud timber wall, the pipe may go back into the wall and then down. Now I use an impact driver with a posi drive 2-bit in the end and remove the screws. To remove the floorboards I have a few tools: a flat bladed screwdriver, a pry bar, a utility bar and a wrecking bar. It's just a case of seeing which one works best. Since this one's had all the screws removed, I simply lift it using a flat bladed screwdriver, then I carry on removing the screws in the other section of floorboard, and again using the flat bladed screwdriver to lift it out. If you have a more modern house you're likely to have large chipboard flooring as seen here in one of my loft conversion videos. If this is the case, just remove the screws as I have using an impact driver. So this is 10mm micro bore pipe and it's running down and through the joists in this direction. As part of the installation I intend to reuse the copper tails coming down off the radiator, so I measure the distance between the two copper pipes. I then go to the new location of the radiator, mark a centre point below the window. I use a spirit level to transfer the mark down above the skirting board. I then measure out from this point the distance required for the copper tails. I now know where the copper tails will enter the floorboards and which floorboards need to be removed. So again, using my impact driver I remove the screws and take up the floorboards. And now with the floorboards removed we can see the main flow and return of the central heating system, all in 22mm pipe, and from this we have the flow to the radiator and the return from the radiator, all in 10mm pipe. So in a minute I'm going to drain down the central heating system in preparation for cutting the copper pipe. If you don't want to drain down the whole system, you can leave water in your radiators by closing off the valves. If you have a lock shield valve like this, take off the plastic cap and using a spanner rotate clockwise until it tightens up fully. When tightening up, count the number of turns. We can then loosen this by the same number of turns later, and that will keep your radiator balanced. And to find out more about balancing radiators you can watch my other video on how to remove and refit a radiator. And that was 2 1/4 turns. If you have a thermostatic valve like this, simply turn it clockwise to 0. Do this for every radiator you want to retain the water in. Now, in my example here, I'm actually going to drain down all the radiators and take the opportunity to refill it with some fresh water and inhibitor. So I'm actually going to open my valves back up now. And if you've chosen to keep water in your radiators as I just showed, then this is what you would do once your installation is complete prior to repressurizing the system. I just rotate the lock shield valve anti-clockwise 2 1/4 turns as we measured earlier, and with the thermostatic radiator valve just turn anti-clockwise to the setting you want. Do this for all the radiators you closed off earlier. If you take a quick look at your boiler you'll see that the system is pressurized and in the green. This will go down to the red when it loses pressure and we drain the system in a minute. To drain down your central heating you need to find the drain valve, and this is usually located at the lowest point on the system. In my example it's on a radiator downstairs. I have a length of hose pipe dedicated to this which I've cut to size in the past. Attach it to the drain valve, rotate this nut anti-clockwise using a spanner. This will allow water to flow freely into the hose pipe and down into my drain. Again, if draining down all the radiators like me, then leave the valves on the radiator open. If you're draining down your radiators like me, use a bleed valve key in your radiator bleed valves, turn anti-clockwise, allowing air in, breaking the vacuum and helping them to drain down faster. Do this to all the radiators in the system you want to drain down. Once you're satisfied all the system is drained, go back round and tighten up all the bleed valves. And don't forget to tighten your drain valve and remove the hose. A quick look at your boiler will confirm that the pressure has completely dropped as the water has now emptied from the system. I'm going to be reusing these copper tails, so I'm going to undo this nut, rotate it anti-clockwise with a spanner. But remember, it's anti-clockwise as it goes onto the thread. As we're looking down from the top, it gives the impression that it's going clockwise, even though it isn't. Before I fully loosen the nut, I put a cloth around the tailpipes just to catch any last dregs of water that may be left in the pipe, and I finish loosening the nut by hand. And simply do the same to the other side. Then I take the radiator off the wall, tilting it into an old pan to drain off any remaining water before placing the radiator to one side. If you've opted to leave water in your radiator, then just remember it's going to be a lot heavier than mine, and also keep those valves shut. So taking a closer look at the radiator brackets, you can see that they can be used on both sides, with one side of the bracket holding the radiator off the wall further than the other. When measuring for the position of your radiator on the wall, you want to measure from the points of the bracket that are sticking out, as that's where the radiator hangs. Note that the screw holes are offset to one side. Then going back to the wall where I'm mounting the radiator, I use the spirit level on the centre line I made earlier and mark another centre line in the middle of the wall. And then taking the measurements from the other radiator brackets, I just duplicate them to this wall, including the height and the width from centre. Once you mark the position of one bracket, use the spirit level to mark the other to ensure that it's level. You can then measure out the correct distance from centre and place a mark on the level line. Now I've marked out all the positions on the wall, I can start to remove the radiator brackets. I remove the screws using an impact driver with a POSIDrive 2-bit. If you're interested in any of the tools or the products I'm using in this video, I'll put links to them all in the description section below. To fix the brackets to the wall, I'm using these core fix plugs and screws, and that's because the wall I'm fixing to is a dot and dab plasterboard wall. If you need to fit plugs to a masonry wall, you can watch me do that here where I fit a TV bracket to the wall. A link to that video will pop up on the screen now, and I'll put a link to that video in the description section below. So I use my SDS drill with an SDS masonry drill bit. I turn the drill to the rotary hammer setting, then drill a hole 100mm deep. I've done a full detailed video on how to use the core fix wall plugs, and if you want to watch this video, a link to that video will pop up on the screen now, and I'll put a link to that video in the description section below. So I push the core fix plastic plug into the wall, then tap it into place with a hammer. I insert the metal core and again tap it into place with a hammer. Add the bracket to the wall, then screw into place with the core fix screw using an impact driver. I leave that screw slightly loose so I can still adjust the bracket. Using a spirit level, I make sure the bracket is plumb. I can then mark out my second hole with a pencil. Now I fix the brackets in exactly the same way using the core fix plugs. Finally, I pick the radiator up, hooking the brackets on the back of the radiator over the brackets on the wall. Then I take a measuring tape and I just measure either side of the radiator to ensure I've got it central to the window. If it's not central, you can give the radiator a tap and you've got a bit of room for manoeuvre either side. Now I need to cut this copper pipe at both ends to remove the copper tails and to redirect the plumbing towards the new position of the radiator. To do this, I'm using this Rolson adjustable pipe cutter, and this pipe cutter is suitable for any pipe between 3 and 22mm, which is perfect for domestic plumbing. To use the pipe cutter, just loosen off the screw until the pipe cutter fits over the copper pipe, then tighten up the screw until the cutting disc bites gently into the copper. Now rotate several times, cutting into the copper until you feel the pipe cutter loosen off. Tighten up the screw again until it bites again with the copper, and repeat the process. Eventually you'll cut right through the copper pipe, at which point you'll either want a jug or some cloth just to soak up any surplus water that may be left in the pipe. Now rub down the cut end of copper with some wire wool, which I forgot to film but I'll show in a minute on another pipe. This is a 10mm JGspeedfit elbow to match the 10mm copper pipe, although the Speedfit does come in a range of sizes. To connect the plastic joint to the copper, simply push it over the copper pipe until it stops and then tighten up the fitting. When adding Speedfit joints to copper pipe, there is no need to add an insert. If you're doing it to plastic pipe, there is, but I'll show you that later in the video. Now I'm using a 12mm spade bit with my drill to drill through the joists and create holes ready for my pipe work. Then I go back to my first radiator tail and cut the pipe using the same method I showed you just now. By doing it like this, I can leave the olive and the nut in place on the radiator tail and reuse it without any modification. Now I go to the radiator in its new position and I place the tail up into the thermostatic valve. I can now mark the location of this tailpipe on this joist. Unfortunately, in my situation, this joist is going to be in the way, so I'm going to have to chisel it out a bit. Now whilst you might not encounter this problem, it's possible. So whilst using the multi-tool with an apparently blunt blade and an equally blunt chisel, I finally create enough room to fit in the tailpipe. I then fit it back into the valve and loosely tighten up the nut. And now it's ready to line up with my new Speedfit pipe. Now I move on to the other length of pipe, again using the Rolson pipe cutter, just rotating round and tightening up gently until the pipe breaks. Clean the end of the pipe with some wire wool, then take our elbow fitting and the same as last time, just push it into place and tighten up. I can then gently bend the pipe down into position where I want it, ready to drill my holes for the new plastic pipe. So again I drill a hole with a 12mm spade bit, and the reason I chose 12mm was it's slightly bigger than the pipe to give it a little bit of room, but equally it's tight enough that the pipes won't rattle around. Then my little helpers in inverted commas turn up to oversee the job. I began to cut the other tail of the radiator again in the same way using the pipe cutter.
Dad, you screw!
Yeah, don't go on the floor then, alright?
What?
Don't don't go on the floor, okay, because you'll fall through the ceiling. Once I finally cut through the pipe, I remove the old pipe from under the floor and then remove the tail, which I'm about to reuse. So with the second tail removed, I repeat the process, placing the tail up into the valve. I mark its position using a pencil onto the joist, and then using a chisel, cut out a small hole to fit it into place. Then I unwind my roller Speedfit pipe, placing it through the holes I drilled earlier, and feeding it through exactly as you would electrical cable. I push it as far as one of the copper tails at the other end, then at the end of the pipe nearest to the camera, I make a cut using the plastic pipe cutters, ready to push into the joint. Now this time, because we're using plastic pipe into the joint rather than copper, we need to use a Speedfit insert. To do this, simply insert it into the pipe and push it as hard as you can until it can't go any further. And this stops the plastic pipe collapsing when it's inserted into the joint. You can now push the pipe into the joint in exactly the same way as the copper, and then tighten up. Before I connect the Speedfit pipe to the copper tails, I need to mark out where the tails go through the floorboards. I do this by placing the floorboards roughly into position, firstly in front of the pipe and then to the side, and then X marks the spot. I drill a hole using the 12mm spade bit. I can then feed my copper tail down through the floorboard and connect back into place in the radiator valve. Again, I leave the nut loose, allowing me to rotate the tail around. Then I repeat the process for the other side. So this is a Speedfit straight coupler, and when pipe is inserted it goes roughly to the centre line here. I'm using this to connect my copper tails to the plastic pipe. So first I give the copper a quick clean with some wire wool, and as mentioned before, the joint can go straight over copper without using an insert. Then holding the plastic pipe next to the joint, I can mark off the centre point of the joint, which is the point at which I need to cut the plastic pipe. Then use your plastic pipe cutters to cut the pipe. Then as before, we push the insert into the plastic pipe. And here you can see the advantage of using plastic pipe and leaving that copper tail loose, because I can flex that pipe into the joint, push it into place, and now it's nice and solid. A really simple procedure for a DIYer like me. And once you're happy, just tighten up the fitting on both ends. Then I just repeat the process for the other length of pipe. Now it's worth mentioning that I have got a separate video on exactly how to use JGspeedfit pipe. If you want to watch that video, a link to that video will pop up on the screen now, and I'll put a link to that video in the description section below. Also, if you have found this video useful, could you please give it a like, and if you haven't done so already, could you please subscribe to my channel, as it would really help me out. So with my first tail in position, I tighten up the nut by hand, then holding the pipe in position with one hand, I tighten the nut up using a spanner. Just nip this up till it feels tight, but don't over tighten. Then do exactly the same to the other side. So now all the pipework is done and tightened up. As mentioned earlier, I want to take this opportunity to add some fresh inhibitor to the system. The easiest way for me to do this is to add it to my towel rail. So I go to the bathroom, remove the nut off the top, I place a funnel into the hole and add my inhibitor. And don't forget, if you're interested in any of the products or the tools used in this video, I'll put links to those in the description section below. Then I place the nut back in the thread, tighten up by hand, and then use a spanner to nip it up. So if you go to your boiler and look underneath, you should see two levers, something like this. On my particular boiler they're blue. Now these are for the fill-in loop. These both need to be turned 90 degrees towards the back of the boiler, and that will allow water into the central heating system, repressurising it and filling it up. Now if you take a look at the pressure gauge on the boiler, you'll see that the pressure is increasing and that needle is going up and heading towards the green. Now ideally you want your needle in the middle of that green section, but because I'm going to be bleeding the radiators while refilling the boiler, I'm going to get a bit of pressure loss, so I'm going to put it above that for now. When you get to the pressure you want, just lock off the valves underneath by rotating them 90 degrees back towards you, and that will stop the flow of water into the heating system. So with the system repressurized, I go to the first radiator, take my bleed key, place it in the bleed valve and turn anti-clockwise, allowing air out of the system. This allows the water to rise to the top of the radiator and filling it up. You're going to want a jug and a cloth for when the water comes at the top and starts to squirt out. Once all the water's come out and you've got a good stream of water, you can lock the valve back off. If you go back to the pressure gauge, you'll notice the pressure has dropped. Don't let it go into the red or you'll end up drawing more air into the system and it'll take forever. So we now need to repeat the process by refilling the boiler, increasing the pressure and then bleeding the next radiator. Continue this process until the system is completely full, and once finished you want your needle to be somewhere in that large green area. Now since it was late and I was in a rush to get the boiler working so the family could have a shower before bed, I forgot to film all the pipework, so here's some photos. You can see the Speedfit elbows in red and the Speedfit straight couplers in blue, interconnected with the Speedfit plastic pipe. So overnight I turned my central heating on just to ensure that it was working, came back in the morning and checked for any leaks, which thankfully there wasn't. I was then able to put my floorboards back down, and whilst doing this I took the opportunity to drill a few more pilot holes and add a few more screws just to avoid any more creaking after the room was decorated. Then I turned around to find my son has emptied a brand new box of screws into a jug of all the old screws. So there we go. So that is pretty much it. Now if you've got any questions you want to ask, then please leave them in the comment section below. If you're interested in any of the tools or the products used in the video, I'll put links to those in the description section below. If you found the video useful, then please give it a like, and if you haven't done so already, can you please subscribe to my channel and press that bell icon for regular notifications. I've been POUSE around the house. Ta-ta, farewell.